True crimers, welcome to Break the Case. I'm your host. I'm Jen Coffindaffer. I'm so excited to be here tonight to talk about the Adelsons. Not just about what they did, we're going to get into that, but we're also going to talk about why they did it. We have a super special guest. I also want to apologize to everyone. The time slated was 6:30 in the morning somehow. It was my fault. I just accidentally tapped AM instead of PM, I think. So for all of those of you who woke up early this morning with me not being there, my deepest apologies. I thought it was so funny. Alan, I think, posted, let's put out a bolo. Well, the bolo worked. I'm found, I'm here, and I'm so glad to have you all here. This is such a dynamic and such an interesting case. You know, anytime you have multiple co-conspirators, you have a family, you have so many other ways that this case could have been resolved. In other words, that the children could have been in the midst of both of their parents in a co-parenting sort of way. Instead, we see the complete opposite of that. So we're going to break it all down. I'm so excited to have Camela Epright with us. I need to say, Dr. Camela Epright. Now listen, she has more three-letter symbols after her name than all the three-letter acronyms that I utilized in the FBI. It's unbelievable. I want to let you know a few of them. She is the professor of philosophy at Furman University in South Carolina. I had to write these down. She's a clinical professor of psychiatry at USC, has that degree. A biomedical science degree, USC. She also did postdoctoral work in psychology at Dartmouth. In addition, she did forensic psychology study at USC. I mean, wow, she's super smart. So we're going to get her on here. I'm looking forward to seeing your questions at the end, but we're going to lay out this case for those of you who don't know about the Adelson case. And then we're also, as I said, going to really dissect what in the world was so foul with all these co-conspirators. Without further ado, bringing her on the stage. Hello, Doc. How are you?
I am wonderful. It is so great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I do want to add just really quickly, I wish those were all degrees. I have those are actually professorships, clinical professorships in neuropsychiatry and behavioral sciences, and then a clinical professorship in biomedical sciences. It all just sounds really fancy. My actual degree is my PhD is actually in philosophy, but those are my area of research. But I do love that you occasionally make mistakes, that you said it was 6:30 in the morning because you never make mistakes. And so it's kind of comforting, like to know that Jen kind of, occasionally slips up. It's awesome.
Oh, that's so funny. Well, I have to tell you, these are my lifeline. And you could tell when I make mistakes, it's typically because I don't have these on. And autocorrect. Autocorrect is not my friend.
Oh, no, they're not your friend. Yes.
No, I type it all in. It looks great. And then all of a sudden I look on Twitter X and it says something else. Well, wait a minute. I did not write that. So anyway, well, let's talk about the Adelsons. I know everybody's excited to hear about this group. Why don't you bring us from the beginning of this conspiracy to where we're at and what each of these players did?
Okay. I mean, it is a long case. There are so many characters. I mean, the cast of characters involved in this, it is batshit. This is crazy. It is one of the craziest cases ever. We are 10 years in. So let me start with the victim. We want to put the victim in the center of the case. And the victim is Dan Markel. He was a professor at Florida State University in the School of Law. Very, very well respected scholar in his area. I've read some of his work. He had a background in philosophy, as a matter of fact. He was Harvard trained, both as an undergraduate and then also as a lawyer. He married Wendy Adelson, and so that's where the name Adelson comes in. right? His wife, he married Wendy Adelson. They had an extremely contentious divorce in 2012. And then in 2014, 10 years ago, July 18th, 2014, Dan had his two children. He took them to daycare. We find out later that morning he is being followed in a car he's being followed everywhere he goes by hitmen. So he first drops his young children, just under 2 and 3, one's 3 and one's just under 2, off at their daycare. And then he goes to the gym, and he is talking on the phone on his way from the gym back to home. And he says to the person he's speaking to, excuse me just for a moment, there's someone unfamiliar in my driveway. And the call cuts off, and the next thing we know, the neighbor is calling the police, and they find that he has been shot in the face. He's been shot twice in the head, in the face. He does not die right away, but he is not conscious. And so he dies the next day. There was a lot of criticism of the Tallahassee police because it looked like nothing was being done. There were not arrests made in the case until the summer of 2016, so 2 years in. But what you actually find out is just what a great job the Tallahassee police did with this investigation. They also involved the FBI.
So sorry, Doc, you went offline because for some reason there's some glitch.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you
Okay.
now, but I had a question for you, and then we went offline.
Okay.
My question for you is, shot in the face, shot in the head. I know he wasn't immediately dead by some miracle. Was his face obliterated?
My understanding from the autopsy photos during trial. Now, this has been tried. There have been 4 different trials involved in this. So Donna, I believe, will be the 5th. From the autopsy photos, he looked very bad. It was very disfiguring and ugly and terrifying. And at one point, his ex-wife says, "Should I bring the children to see them?" And the police said it would be a very bad idea to do that. So.
Great. I just wanted to get a picture because sometimes people are grazed in the head. Sometimes it's not as bad as it sounds in the head. So I wanted to get a feel. I'm glad you were able to enlighten us there. All right. So bring us to the point now that he's in the driveway. He's been shot 3 times. What happens next?
Twice, yeah.
Oh,
and his ex-wife now, they went through an extremely contentious divorce. The most contentious part of the divorce, which I think is the key to this entire case. In order to understand this case, you have to understand this divorce and what the issues were in this divorce. His ex-wife, Wendy Adelson, is also she's an adjunct professor in the Department in law. She's an immigration attorney, but she does not have a tenured professorship. He is a very well-established scholar, and Wendy is not that. They divorce. She leaves him in this really dramatic way. He refers to that as Pearl Harbor, where she does a sneak attack on him. And the real controversy comes that she is born and raised in the Miami-Dade County area. And she has a family this becomes incredibly important, extremely enmeshed with one another. Her mother, Donna, who will go on trial in September, is the matriarch of all of this and seems to be kind of the kingpin in everything that happens. Dan Markel is shot in his driveway. Wendy is tracked down at lunch with her friends. She comes in and has a 5-hour discussion with the detectives. And she names her own family kind of as, well, I don't think it could have possibly been my family, but of course they don't like Danny because Danny treated me badly. And what treated me badly is Wendy wanted to move the children to South Florida. And that was a real important thing for her mother. There's a huge email train of Donna, the woman who was being tried, the mother, really being manipulative and making all of these recommendations to try to manipulate things to move the children to South Florida. They do not want Wendy in Tallahassee. Grandma does not want her sunshines taken away from her, and they will do anything to get Wendy down to South Florida. But Dan is a wonderful father. He loves his children and he wants to parent his children, and he does not want her relocating. The children have their friends, and he's a very devoted father, and they share custody. So what I would say about the Dan Markel case is this victim died because he wanted to be a father to his children.
Wow. Tell me how they met. How did this relationship start? Where did it go awry? Were there adulterous behavior? Was it, what upset them?
So here's how I think how it started actually gives us a precursor to where this case is going. And that is that she met him on JDate, which is a dating application for Jewish couples. Her mother, Donna Adelson, basically chose him out of the selection on JDate. And it was very clear she did so because he was Jewish. Both families are Jewish. It will become very relevant that Dan was a very, very devout Jew, a very devout Jew. Wendy's family is more culturally Jewish. Being Jewish is very important to them, but they actually refer to Dan as a religious fanatic because he practices Judaism differently than they do. But on paper, or at least online, Dan is the perfect candidate for their beautiful daughter. He's good looking, he's very smart, he's extremely accomplished, he's very well respected. He is the perfect picture husband. Their wedding announcement was in the New York Times. This is a family that really cares about prestige. It really cares about appearances. It really cares about the way they're perceived by the community. So it's really important to sort of note that from the very beginning, this relationship was dictated by Donna Adelson. She chose Dan for her daughter. There was no adultery. Dan was very much in love with his wife, but he was also a really committed scholar. And she was also very educated. She is herself a lawyer. She doesn't quite have his pedigree. I don't really like talking about academic credentials as pedigree. It always kind of sounds like we're talking about dogs or something. But no, I mean, he has a Harvard background. She also, she was very intelligent and very smart, but she wasn't Dan. I think most people aren't Dan. I'm not Dan either, right? He was just and I think there was jealousy and tension. There was the conflict with religion. He wanted to raise his children. They agreed to raise their children kosher, in a kosher household. That really irritated Donna. So Donna has been irritated by Dan not corresponding to what her ideal conception of what a mate for her daughter is since the very beginning. It starts at the wedding. Dan had requested that there be kosher food. He was inviting Jewish people from all over the country, including the rabbi. And she promised that it would be kosher, and then it wasn't. He sees a plate go by with meat and milk on it, and it's very clear that his guests will not be able to eat. So at any point at which, Dan does not respond in the way Donna wants him to, she punished him from the very beginning.
Very interesting. Now, you said Dr. Markel went to Harvard. What degree did he get? Was that where
he's actually not a doctor? That comes up in trial. Actually, he's a professor. He's a lawyer. He has a JD.
A JD.
He's a JD. So he's a professor of law at Florida State when he was killed.
Unbelievable. All right. So bring us forward to now we kind of have the background, how they met, which is all so fascinating, I think, how you tied that in. Bring us now to he's dead. How does this case go from shot in the driveway to all these co-conspirators?
Unbelievable.
Being put together.
So the police in Tallahassee figure out that the buses, so there is an identification of a car, a silver pine mica Prius. I know everything about this case. I've been following this case. This is probably the case that got me interested in true crime because it was a fellow academic. There was some speculation for a while that he might have been killed by a student. And I have been following this case since very early, like probably, we're 10 years and I've probably been following it for 9 years. So if I go into too much detail, you have to cut me off because I could just go on forever.
No, I love it. You sound like me when I talk about Idaho. I'm like,
oh, no, you know so much about Idaho. You are just the woman. I listen to you all the time. So there's a sighting of a silver pine mica Prius, and it has a aftermarket mirror on the side. The mirror does not match what it should look like. It was clearly replaced at some time. And it also has a transponder for, the Florida pass for the toll roads. I don't know what that's called. A sun pass, right? Which is not typical in northern Florida. It's more typical in southern Florida. And so they get the bus footage and they see these two Hispanic men that were following Dan around that morning. And they are clearly from South Florida. So why are these men from South Florida that have no connection to this law professor? Why are they following him around? And why did they kill them, essentially? So it becomes very clear that they don't really have any connection to him. And so the mystery, of course, is how are they involved? One of them, Luis Rivera, is a Latin king. And there is a sweep of the Latin kings. And he is arrested. He calls himself a jack boy. I rob drug dealers, is what he says. And there is a sweep of, so he ends up going to jail. He's going to prison anyway. And they make an offer. Can you tell us about what happened? And he rolls over on his best friend, Sigfredo Garcia, who was the actual shooter in this pair, but obviously they're co-conspirators. And Rivera gets a sweetheart deal for himself. He gets 9 additional years as opposed to getting life in prison, which is what everyone else has gotten so far. And he agrees to testify in the trials. And
so I think it's very interesting that he's a jack boy, because having a gang background, that's you're going to jack somebody, you're going to steal, but it's a very specific situation where they're going after typically other drug dealers that are there, or gang members that are not their fellow Latin King gang members. They're their rival gang members. So this is so interesting. So he cops a deal on his best buddy. What was his best buddy's role, if you know, in the gang?
I do. I can tell you all about it. The best buddy is not a Latin king. They grew up together. And it's very interesting that you should mention that usually he's a jack boy, usually it's against other gangs. In fact, according to his report, and it seems to be pretty accurate, he's pretty honest, Luis Rivera's, when he's being interviewed, I didn't want to kill this guy. I wasn't going to kill this guy. They in fact went they drove one other time up to Tallahassee, and they both turned around and didn't feel like they could kill him. They didn't, they had no problem with this man. And it was actually, there was some conscience among them of like, why are we killing this man? And what he says is, we're killing the man because the lady wants she wants her kids back. That's what we're doing. So how does this all work? Who are these two guys? Well, what we find out is that there's a middle woman, and the middle woman's name is Catherine Magnanua, who's also serving a life term. Catherine Magnanua worked in the dental office that was owned by Wendy Adelsons' father, Harvey, and her brother, Charlie. Both of them are dentists. Charlie, who is the big figure here, also serving a life sentence, was a periodontist in South Florida, liked to lift weights. He had, he's really proud of having sort of friends on both sides of the tracks and counsels people in steroids. And he's always got some kind of like, extra side hustles going on. And, he's an educated dentist and he makes a lot of money, but like, he kind of moves money around for taxes, and he's always giving everybody advice, right? Charlie's always telling people how to like handle their money and how to, handle their steroids. And he's a bodybuilder, he's a very short man that kind of made up for it by being a bodybuilder. And we find out that he had been having a relationship with Catherine Magnanua, Katie Magnanua. And
so Charlie was married to somebody else.
No, Charlie was not married to anyone. Charlie was very proudly not married. Charlie is not going to get married to anyone.
All right.
But he is having sex with, there's a relationship between him and Katie Magnanua, who works in the dental office. Katie Magnanua has 2 children with Sigfredo Garcia, Luis Rivera, Sigfredo Garcia. So there is the connection
with the trigger man, not the trigger boy.
Right. So the Latin king, Luis Rivera, rode along with his friend to North Florida to kill Dan Markel. And why did he do it? He did it because Katie said, if you want me back, you want to have a family, we have a family together. If you want to move back in, you got to do this. She asked him to do it one time. They drove up there. They kind of chickened out, right? Like they just felt like they couldn't kill him. And they came back and she said, you got to do this if you're going to get back together with me. So on the one hand, she had a relationship with Charlie, but she is using herself as the bait for her long-term boyfriend from high school, the father of her children, to kill Dan Markel. And it is for money. And what we, of course, find out is that Charlie Adelson, the brother of Wendy Adelson, is the person who organized the hit. He did it through the woman he was involved with, Katie Magnanua.
And tell us the amount of money paid for his life.
It is very difficult to track down all of the amount of money that was paid for his life. There was a large amount of money that was given on the day of the crime. I want to say it's like $40,000. I'm sorry, don't quote me on that. I don't remember the exact, but that's actually not what's most important. And this actually ties Donna in. One of the things that happens is that Katie Magnanua gets checks from the Adelson Institute, that's the dental office, that are signed by Donna herself. And what she's getting $470 a week. There are, 44 checks written out to her. And what she reveals in court is, I needed insurance for my children. So she put me on the payroll. So there's the payroll. She also has breast augmentation that she only pays half for. The joke is Charlie bought one breast and she bought the other breast from a famous Miami plastic surgeon. He also gives her a boat. He sells Harvey, his father's Lexus, to her for a reduced price. So there is a lot of money moving hands. I'm not sure of all the totals. It is a significant amount of money. At least it wasn't $400. I mean, it's a weird thing to say, at least his life was worth more to them than that. But it was a significant amount of money. It's hard to know all of the different threads because it was paid in so many different ways.
And in a way, Doc, that's brilliant, right? I mean, when you're giving away boats or cars or all these other things, it is so difficult to trace. And I just have to think that that was very much schemed out and planned.
I mean, I would think so. I mean, there are things about this that are so boneheaded that they're embarrassing. But that did seem like it was harder to track down the money. There was work that had to be done to figure out the exchange of money in this.
But as you said, one of the biggest deals was really sort of this, hey, quid pro quo, you can have me again and your kids and family. It seems like that was the big one. And then were there any, if you will, hey, listen, I need a little bit more money based on what's happened. Tell us about kind of how the whole thing played out.
Yeah, it's hard to know. Yes, I mean, it does seem that way, right? Like there's the breast augmentation. There's also trips. Katie Magnanua's mom was dying and he sends her on a trip. I think he actually has a trip to Disneyland for her children. There does seem to be a lot of like extra exchanges because it starts to get complicated, right? There's the very famous part of the story that involves Charlie. And so Charlie and Donna seem to be pretty insulated from this, right? They're going after the prosecutor in Florida, Georgia Kappelman. Man, I have so much respect for this woman. She did this case methodically. There was a lot of criticism. It's like, well, we know that the Adelsons, the wealthy people in South Florida, were involved. And instead, you're going after these, Hispanic people who have, more difficulty financially. Why are you going after them first? But it wasn't that. It was a strategy, right? Georgia Kappelman is building a very careful foundation, and she tries them one at a time. So the first people to be tried, because Luis Rivera participated, was Luis Garcia, obviously. And then Luis Rivera, Sigfredo Garcia, and Katie Magnanua go on trial together. He is found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. She gets a hung jury. They retry the case. Katie gets life in prison. One of the big questions is, why didn't she flip on Charlie? And nobody seems to really know that. it's clear that she didn't care about killing Dan Markel. She didn't have anything against him personally, right? And there were deals that were offered to her that she didn't take them. Now, we do know that the Adelsons paid her legal expenses. There's been a lot of research on figuring out that they paid her legal expenses. There's some speculation that maybe they made some promises about security for her children later on. But I think everyone thought they were going to get away with this, right? Everyone seems to think that they were going to get away with this. And I do think that goes back again to this linchpin of Donna, right? If what we're doing is analyzing, I think we really have to start with the relationship of this family and how much of an iron fist Donna wielded in this family, right? I want my grandchildren back meant that my son is going to set up this hit. And it's not really clear. The person who has not been indicted yet has been named an unindicted co-conspirator is Wendy Adelson. She is very interesting. It's hard to know. There's some arguments for why she was involved. I believe that she was. I do believe that she was. But it's not clear whether she was, how much she knew in advance, how much she knew afterwards. But Charlie very much has the personality of, I'm going to be the one that can do it because I can do anything, right? I know about cars and I know about the people on the other side of the tracks, and I'm just, bombastic and I can give advice to everyone. And he kind of acts like, well, of course I know how to figure all of this out. But he's really, I have a son. I want my son to love his mother, but Charlie is weirdly a mama's boy, right? This really bombastic guy who thinks he can control everything and thinks that he knows everything. At the end of the day, he is taking his marching orders from Donna Adelson. And so I don't know whether this will end with Donna or if Georgia Kappelman has more planned trials in the future. So Rivera takes the deal. Sigfredo Garcia is life in prison. His partner, Katie Magnenua, gets a hung jury, is tried again, is convicted, life in prison. After she is life in prison, she pro-offers information and testifies against Charles Adelson. And finally, 8 years into the murder, Charles Adelson is finally tried. And he was, in fact, found guilty. Here's the interesting part about Donna. So we'll just go straight into Donna here. Donna was arrested a week after her son was sentenced to life in prison, escaping to Vietnam. She was arrested on the jetway, walking to her plane with a one-way ticket, first to Dubai and then to Vietnam, both of which are countries that do not have extradition treaties with the United States. And we know this because there are endless jail calls where tearful phone calls between Charles Adelson and his mother berating Georgia Kappelman, the prosecutor, and they just didn't get a fair trial. They didn't have a trial of their peers because everyone in North Florida is an idiot and they're not our peers. And so there's a lot of these whiny phone calls. It's unbelievable. But on two different occasions, Donna Adelson is talking on the phone to her son, Charles, two times. This is how boneheaded this is. And the phone cuts out. Apparently this happens with prison phone calls. She gets cut off and she thinks that she's hung up, but she hasn't. The line is still open. And so one of the phone calls, the line is still open. And she is talking to a friend and to her husband about, well, we tracked down the information on Vietnam and it really doesn't extradite to the United States. And we're buying this villa in Vietnam and this is what we're going to do. And we talked to our lawyer and he said, it's worth a shot to try to get out. You may not make it, but you might as well try. I don't know whatever happened with the lawyer. Like that seems like maybe something you're not allowed to say to your client, but we don't know whether or not it was actually said. And so it's very clear that they're a flight risk. They buy a one-way ticket. She's trying at the last minute to secure visas. We have all this information on that. They're moving things around. They're trying to get a visa. They specifically fly to Dubai just because they want to make sure that the visa is going to cover them for Vietnam. But even if it doesn't, they are safely ensconced in Dubai, where they're not going to be extradited. but the police get them on the jetway as they're walking into the plane. They arrest Donna. They don't arrest Harvey.
Yeah, I found that very interesting. A couple of things, right? I found her fit about not wanting to give up her phone so interesting. And I want you to get into, we're going to segue into sort of the psychology of these people. I call it elitism. I don't know what else to call it.
That's entitlement. It's unbelievable entitlement. It's just they just think that they're smarter. They think they're the smartest people in the room. And they also think that, like, well, everybody else is going to recognize that too, right? They have no empathy at all. And they have no sense of that anyone else is not going to be as impressed with them as they are impressed with themselves, right? They think they're evil geniuses, but evil geniuses don't leave the cell phone line open and talk about, what countries we can escape to that don't have extradition treaties. I do love you're talking about her. So she's on the jetway. She is, they're arresting her. They're actually being kind of nice to her because they're like, go ahead and take off your jewelry and give it to your husband, which they didn't have to do that. And she's all worried.
Can I tell you, though, the inside scoop why law enforcement does that?
Oh, yeah, no.
I'm going to give you the inside scoop. The reason law enforcement did this, and I always did it, I'm like, please take everything. All I need, I don't want belts. I don't want shoestrings. I don't want jewelry. It's because we as agents and officers, you have to deal with that as inventory, personal property, and you can't close a case, at least in the FBI, if you have any bit of property. So the bottom line is everybody ends up getting arrested, and you can't get anybody to take this jewelry, these shoestrings off your hands, and you're in an administrative quagmire. So that's why they want to get rid of it, just to let you know.
No, that makes sense.
Not being that nice. They just don't want to deal with it.
Yeah, well, that makes all the sense in the world, because it's sort of like, wow, why are you like, you can just throw this person to the ground, frankly. You don't have to, like, go ahead and take your rings off and give them to your husband. But they ask her for her cell phone. And she's like, no, I'm not giving up my phone. And you can see it on the video where she's like, I'm not giving up my phone. And they're like, we have a warrant for everything. I mean, we're arresting you. Give me the phone. No. My lawyer said I didn't have to turn over my phone. And they're like, give us the phone. So, even at the moment at which she is being taken down, I believe by federal agents, I don't actually think they were Florida, I think it were federal agents, she is still arguing that I know more than you do. Let me tell you, my lawyer told me I don't have to turn over my phone to you. So no, she just acts like she's smarter. And then in her original court appearances, she's, all these gestures and, people are saying things and she's like, and, the judge is like, you need to keep your comments to yourself. You need to calm down. But, it is, again, this absolute disdain for any people that she thinks are beneath her, right? You don't understand. I'm smarter. I'm the one that understands. And, she even approaches the prosecutor this way, the judge this way, and pretty much everyone else. Everyone is supposed to be Donna's servants. And that is how she treats people. I'm not sure how well that's going to go over in the courtroom.
Well, don't you think a lot of it too, and I want to know now that we're going to just segue from facts into this mentality. For me, what is the mentality that I always see with so many of these people that you arrest, that they seem totally out of touch with reality? I mean, it's obvious they've never watched, Law and Crime or Court TV, because they just think they're going to get out right away. They don't think they have to give up their cell phones. They think everything's going to be fine and dandy. What's the mentality of somebody who is so educated, so intelligent, so accomplished, not understanding the reality?
Yeah, it's amazing. I'll start in this analysis with when Charlie was being tried. The story that he gives is absolutely insane and just like nobody would ever believe this. It was basically like, oh, Katie heard me talking about the struggle with my brother-in-law to get the children out here, and so her ex-partner goes and kills them so that it's an extortion against me, and then they make me pay, right? So it's this whole, like, they dreamed it up. It wasn't me. I wasn't involved at all. And it's so harebrained that you can't imagine why anyone would believe it. But if you listen to these prison calls between Donna and Charlie later, it's like, well, I just don't know why. They just weren't going to listen to me. And those people in Tallahassee, the prosecutor uses her sweet little Southern accent. And, all of the people on the jury are dumb. I think, where does the mentality come from? They've always won the social game before. Right? You've spent your whole life winning the social game. Right? You've won your whole life being wealthy and advantaged and privileged and being everybody what to do. And why wouldn't you think you can do that? They were so unrealistic about Charlie that Donna keeps really, really significant notes. I believe that this will come up at her trial. She writes everything down. They believed that Charlie was going to get out. They were shocked when he was found guilty, which I cannot conceive of a reason why you would think that. She actually went out and bought a new luggage set because she was going to send him and his lawyer away when he was found innocent. So they are completely planning. He gives all of his commissary things away. He's going into trial and he's like, I am going to be found not guilty today. So I'm magnanimously going to give all of the things I bought at the commissary to the other prisoners. And my mom is going to bring my suitcase and we're going to go on this great vacation. And you just think anyone would know that this wasn't going to work. And you're smart. You guys have educations. Why would you believe that anyone would believe this? But I think you're right. I think it's an entitlement, right? I've always gotten what I wanted. Why can't I control you now? I've always controlled everyone.
And is this, with all of them, with all the Adelsons, are they truly narcissistic personality disorder, right? Everybody has some narcissism in there.
Yes.
And normal amounts of whatever, depression, narcissism, all the emotions that a human feels. But some people have it where it's an actual disorder. Isn't that what we're seeing on the stand and what we're seeing with their actions? What are your thoughts?
So let me show my hand on this. I have a lot of trouble. In fact, I'm writing a paper on this. I have a lot of trouble with people who think, and this is not you, I'm talking in general, I'm talking about people in the world and online, that they think they can read a list of diagnostic factors and that they can, diagnose people that they've never met before and that they've, never interviewed. And actually workers are not allowed to do that. Right? People who actually know how to diagnose aren't allowed to do that. And so I am not going to diagnose. I mean, after all, I work in neuropsychiatry, but I am a philosophy professor, and a real neuropsychiatrist wouldn't do that because, we don't diagnose people that we haven't interviewed. But you are right. You are absolutely right. I will talk about it in terms of traits, and I can't tell you whether they have narcissistic personality disorder. But I can tell you that their traits are stronger than they are for most people. Right. The entitlement, but also I think the thing that needs to be said when we talk about narcissism, we often think about the things that we've already talked about, which are, being bombastic and thinking that you're better than other people. But what we have to remember is that's only the traits that the popular press discusses. What it means to really be narcissistic is that you feel really hollow and empty inside, right? Why are you this way? True, genuine narcissists are people who feel really detached and not secure in their identity. And I think the best representative of that in this family is Wendy Adelson. Wendy Adelson, one of the people who testifies is named Jeffrey Lucasse. Jeffrey Lucasse is a social work professor at the University of Florida State, and he dated Wendy. He actually knows very much about diagnosis. This is what he does. It's what he writes in. And he talked about dating her and her just being fragile and anxious and being a liar, partly because it made her really uncomfortable. And, she could be very gregarious, but really inside she was incredibly fragile. So oddly, I would argue that the person who demonstrates true narcissism, besides the narcissism we hear about in the headlines, is really Wendy. Right? Wendy was educated. But she doesn't really succeed. She doesn't succeed to the level of her husband. She's anxious all the time. She needs constant reinforcement that she's good and she's special. And the family doesn't treat her like an adult. Jeffrey Lucasse says this in many different ways at many different times, that she's the princess. She's the youngest child. She's the girl. They actually have in their house kind of almost like a monument to Wendy. She's very beautiful, but she's very unstable in her sense of self, which is kind of interesting. So I just wanted to point that out as a form of narcissism that we don't talk about, but that actually is sort of the triggering aspect of real narcissistic personality disorder.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I find myself using that word more than I should. I get asked a lot about it, especially, when I'm commenting on television, because as you said, it's the headline, right? Oh, they're such a narcissist. Oh, they're doing this because they're a narcissist. And I really appreciate that, much more in-depth explanation. I always say, so when I use that word, and I'm going to use it a lot less now, it's because in the criminal element, I guess, we put people in different blocks, right? There's some people who are so withdrawn. They have absolutely no empathy, no sense of feeling. A lot of them have been completely subjected to horrible treatment as children. I'm particularly talking about people involved in gangs. It's amazing how their humanity is stripped from them. At one point they were just a sweet child, and it just gets stripped away. But these other people I'm talking about, that I guess I've used the word narcissist, are those in the criminal element that I see that just feel so entitled, like we talked about, that everybody else is beneath them. Everybody is dumb. They know the answer to every question. And guess what? I can get away with anything. I'll tell you a person that this just screams is Scott Peterson.
Oh, gosh,
Even
yes.
now, he's trying to convince everybody that he's innocent, because I think he thinks he can convince people of that. And that's with the Adelsons too, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think one of the things that we tend to do is we tend to want to explain these kinds of behaviors through mental illness, right? If there's something we don't understand, it must be because there's a mental illness. And so there's all this talk now, the last DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, was a bestseller. I love to point that out, because it's like a cardiology manual would never be a bestseller. I mean, that's just kind of crazy if you think about it, right? And because the idea is, well, anybody can diagnose. I just look at this list, right? Here's this list and they meet this. I mean, even though I don't know anything about clinical significance. I don't know, I don't have the gating. There's all these gating features. We don't even diagnose unless you meet certain criteria. And then we start asking questions. And as you pointed out, most of us have some kinds of aspects of our personality that could be disordered in certain ways. And so you have to understand clinical significance. But I always like to just bring people back to, why are these disorders? And I think what you're saying is perfect here, right? I mean, it can be the horrible abuse, but it can also be, I'm not living up to all of the glory that I was supposed to live up to. My mother has this image of who her family is and what is expected of us. And she actually wrote all these emails to Wendy giving her advice on her divorce, and they are off the chain. Man, we should do a whole episode just on those damn emails, where she recommends that Wendy convert the boys to Catholicism, or at least tell Dan that. But here's the big one. She recommends that, why don't you dress them up in Hitler Youth uniforms and take pictures of them, because that will make Danny so crazy that he will comply with what we want. Do that. I think you should do that, Wendy. And so all of these are like these pep talks of her trying to control her children. And I think what you see, I mean, if we're going to talk about personality disorders, and as I said, I'm cautious about that, certainly these personality traits of the fragility, right? The genuine fragility. Wendy doesn't have a very good sense of self. Charlie's sense of self is that he has to be the mastermind in everything, right? Neither of them are those things. And I think the domineering mother actually really injured them, right? It's always the mother's fault. But I think in this case, it really is, right? I don't know how to diagnose Donna. Jeffrey Lacasse says this family is really lacking in empathy. And certainly with those cluster B disorders that we've been mentioning, the lack of empathy is a big key. So we can say, we don't know if they have a disorder, but man, do they have a lot of these traits. And one of the big traits is they don't have empathy for other people. Other people are pawns. Other people are chess pieces that we can move around. And we are shocked when we figure out that we're not the masters of the universe.
But will they ever figure that out? Or will they always be the victim? In other words, like you were talking about those jailhouse calls, will it always be, oh, you know what? They didn't, those weren't our peers. They're not smart enough to make the decisions. Those are janitors and teachers and this and that. They're not professors. They're not PhDs. They're not doctors. So how in the world could they judge us? So actually, we haven't been found guilty because the peons found us guilty.
That's right.
Isn't that,
I mean, they say it. It's nothing subtle about this. We don't have to guess about this. They literally say it. He's going through the jury. He's talking to his mom and he's like, oh, and this person did this and this person does that. I don't know. I don't remember the professions, but it really was like, oh, he's a bus driver. Like, why would he think that he could say anything about me? These are not my equals. And, all of these people up here, I mean, really just dismissing Tallahassee. Right? It's a university town. There's a few smart people in Tallahassee, right? But no, I don't think they'll ever recognize themselves as guilty at all. I think they are so entitled. All I wanted, I mean, I don't know what they're telling themselves, but I deserved to have my grandchildren with me. And Dan Markel was in my way. And I can justify killing the father of my grandchildren because I want to have them with me. And it's just, I don't think they're ever going to see themselves as anything more than the entitled people that they are. Charlie thinks he was treated horribly unjustly. And Donna, I think we'll see a lot of that with her as well.
And what I find to be, I always believe in justice. At the end of the day, I do feel like karma, whatever we want to call it, justice, it all works itself out. But in this case, it hasn't really yet. Right? We have some people in jail, in prison. They're there for a long time. But at the end of the day, the children are with Wendy. So didn't they in the day, in a way, achieve what they set out to do? So maybe they were the masterminds.
Yeah, I do think that. That's actually such a good point. I mean, someone pointed that out about O.J. Simpson, like, oh, he walks in and he thinks he can control the cops and, he's buddy with everyone and he thinks that's going to let him get away. And then it did. It did actually let him get away with it. They got exactly what they wanted, right? Danny Markel is dead. The next day after the memorial service, they're in South Florida with the boys. And then they cut off all contact between Dan Markel's family. So even his parents are not allowed to visit the children. The children have no contact at all with the Markel side of the family. She immediately changed the name of the children. She claims that, oh, I was terrified, Danny was killed and maybe my kids would be killed too. And so, I had to change their name, as though the name Adelson isn't going to be all over the press too, right? It's just, did they get, it's terrifying to think about it that way. But at the end of the day, they did kind of get what they wanted. They didn't expect to end up in prison. And they got 10 years of what they wanted. And maybe Wendy Adelson got what she wanted forever, because I don't know that we're going to ever arrest Wendy.
Well, I don't know. Not so fast.
Yeah, good. I want to hear this.
A little bit in my lane. So there's a couple of things that I feel like this prosecutor, as you said, built a case that was rock solid, that used building blocks, that got to the end of where she was going in the proper way so that she would get her convictions. I think that as time goes on, those jail calls will continue, maybe even some animosity. And let's look at this. Why was Wendy right near Markel's place?
Oh, God.
Why on the street, and then just didn't wonder, geez, I wonder what all this police activity is right by his place. And, oh, I think I'll just go to lunch, and I have a liquor store right by my house, but I think I'll go clear across town to a liquor store. Her story has more holes in it than Swiss cheese. It's a hot mess. I don't know if she'll get away with it, but I think it's going to take a while.
I mean, from your mouth to God's ears, right? Like, I mean, all of us who have followed this case, the one that we really want to be arrested is Wendy, right? And it is so entitled. And I think, but here we go back to this fragile sense of self. I think it freaked Wendy out, right? I think all of this scared her so much. She was incredibly anxious about all of it. So the story about driving past the crime scene is she is supposed to have a TV repairman come over. The whole story, that's her alibi. And then she's going to go have lunch with friends. But for some reason, she has to go pick up this bottle of bullet whiskey for her friends who are getting married for their Stock the Bar party. But, I can only remember the liquor store that's near my old house, which is literally on the other side of town and not even close to where I'm going to lunch, which, by the way, there's an ABC Liquors in the strip mall where she was having lunch. So she just has to go drive all the way across town. And, I like to take the shortcut to go down my old street. And when she's talking to the police about this, they're like, how is that a short? Like, wait, you did that one. But anyway, so she gets to the street. She's trying to turn on, it's Trescott. She's trying to turn on Trescott, and she sees all of this police tape. And her sons were in that house hours before. You don't know what's going on. She said, oh, I thought it was a fallen tree. It's like, really, a fallen tree? And there's all these police cars. And apparently people who have seen the scene said there's no way that you couldn't tell from where she drove in, that you couldn't tell where the activity was. I don't know. I've not been there, but the commentators that are from Tallahassee said, where she was trying to turn around was 2 or 3 houses away from Dan Markel's house. And it was very clear that you could tell that that's where the activity was. This is a woman who, even if her story is true, that I had to drive this way and I had to take this shortcut, even if that were true, why the hell didn't she call the daycare? That would have been the first thing I did. I see police tape. My kid spent the night in that house. I'm going to call the daycare to make sure my kid's okay. But she never does. So she goes to the crime scene. Oh, I didn't go to the crime scene. What were you doing there? And then it's very clear she's not concerned about it, because wouldn't you call your kid? That would be the first thing I would do. And so it just looks bad, but doesn't look bad enough to result in an arrest.
Well, let me talk about a couple of other things, right? These messages. I think that's code.
All of it's code. Yeah.
TV repairman? No. And then she makes some comment about sweet. Like, in other words, what they did was sweet, and then erase them right before they took her phones. Right. We call these clues in the Bureau. I mean, I agree with you. Does it all stack up enough to end up getting somebody indicted? I don't know, but I hope that there are more slip-ups. I hope things are mentioned in letters and in jailhouse phone calls, and I just hope there's more.
I mean, they do seem to have a tendency to leak, right? They do seem to have a tendency of not being able to stop themselves from saying things. And here's one thing that I would, if I were Wendy, I would be very concerned about that. If you went back and listened to those jail calls, Donna and Charlie are expressing a lot of frustration. I don't know, what a coincidence. Why would, Wendy just happen to, like, of all things, she happened to go by, and you can see that they are frustrated with Wendy. And I don't know if they would flip on one another. They haven't so far. They've protected Wendy, but Donna keeps reminding her in various things. We've always protected you. She sends out texts. We've protected you, Wendy. Everyone's protecting you. She keeps using the word protection. There's a lot of leakage going on, and they're starting to build resentment, right? We did this. If we did this, which I know we did, but if we did this, we did it for you, and you're the one that's not going to jail. So I hope that benefits Georgia Kappelman in some way.
Well, I just really think that as time goes by, and if Donna is convicted and gets a life sentence, and today they said, listen, I think this was today in this pretrial hearing, they said, listen, no deals. The judge specifically asked, are you going to offer up a deal? And the prosecution said no. And then he asked the defense, actually, is there any deal that you're looking at? And they said no. So I think this is going to go to trial, which makes all the sense in the world to me based on her personality and what we've seen. If she's convicted and gets life, I think that's where the dam breaks. I really do. Because as you said, Wendy's dumb, fat, and happy with the kids in Miami, living it up, and they are in a horrible situation, really worried about their lives, right? People in prison love to kill famous people. And the Adelsons,
Oh, is that right?
oh yeah, that's the big reason you have to put people in seg. That's why Jeffrey Dahmer, was
Yeah,
beaten to
was
death.
killed. Yeah.
And because that's how these people who are there, they're lifers, they're never getting out. And it's like one last hurrah for them. So best case scenario, she's in solitary confinement 23 hours a day.
I mean, that's horrible, and it's a horrible human rights abuse, but you got to do what you got to do, right? But no, I mean, here's where I would hope, and I'm going to go along your line of argument. If everything was done for Donna, right? Donna wanted those kids. Right? Donna wanted to control her own kids, right? Like, I'm going to tell Wendy how to conduct her divorce. Wendy's a lawyer, but I'm going to send her email after email after email telling her how to deal with the courts, right? At the end of the day, Donna thinks that she knows best about everything, and everybody is bowing down to what Donna wants in this. If Donna goes to prison, maybe Donna's going to be pretty frustrated with the fact that Wendy's out and living her best life.
Well, right? I totally agree with that philosopher, because as you said, from the word go, she even chose her mate, who she was going to marry. She is the matriarch, and she wants to be large and in charge. And when you're in prison, you're not in charge of anything. She's completely out of charge. So I think that's what this prosecutor, slowly but surely, I think we're going to see charges against Wendy. Let me ask you really quick. What about Papa Adelson?
Yeah,
know anything?
I know a bit about him. The story about him is, he's a survivor of brain cancer. He is not. He had some kind of benign condition where they did have to do brain surgery on him. He is an older man. I think he is cowed by his wife. I do think his wife was in control of everything. I do actually believe that. But it's really hard to claim that you didn't know. It's like, oh, we're going to Vietnam? Like, what are we doing going to Vietnam? Like, why are we buying a house in Vietnam? I mean, it's just the idea that Harvey didn't know anything, right? Harvey's also the person who makes the money, right? His boat was given away to Catherine McNamara. His car was sold to Catherine McNamara, right? I mean, it is really hard to imagine that Harvey didn't know anything, right? Especially considering that Donna is so kind of unstable in these. She can't stop discussing her entitlement, right? Like, I can't believe they're doing this to me. All these really overly dramatic phone calls. I mean, Harvey's seeing all of that. Harvey has to know something, right? Is it enough to be indicted? I mean, are you going to indict a 75-year-old man? I don't know. I guess that does remain to be seen. He is not the person that I am most concerned about. I really think Wendy's the problem here. I
just think it's clear to me that he aided and abetted. As you mentioned, it was his items. They're going to Vietnam. But you're right. It's a harder sell. I'll be interested to see where this case goes. Another quick question for you, Doc, from a psychiatric perspective. These people are alphas, right? If you ever read the book Brave New World by Aldous Huxley's, they're the alphas. They're the ones that are the educated, that are controlling, that are the movers and the shakers. And how do you go from, getting your education, getting married, building wealth, running a dental office, to such a horrible scheme to murder somebody? I mean, literally having his head blown up.
Seriously. I mean, just the idea that you would be willing to do that to the father of your grandchildren. I mean, it does make me sort of feel like you don't really love them either. Or you don't love them really either, because, you're so committed to getting what you want that they are also objects to you, right? You are willing to take their beloved father away from them. You're willing to take their identity away from them. So how do you get from being an alpha to this? Well, alphas are really used to getting what they want, right? And if alphas are not particularly invested in making sure that other people, that in playing in community, right? Like, why do we do some of the things we do? We do it because we want to be a member of a community. But if you think you're better than everyone in the community and you've always gotten everything you wanted, what's a little violence, right? I mean, right? You know?
Yeah. So it becomes basically something that they feel they can so easily justify that what's a little bit of violence? Let's just throw some of that in there if that means we're going to get our way.
Right. Because if we don't have empathy and we just think we deserve everything, we're entitled and not empathetic, of course we can kill the father of my grandchildren's father because he's in my way.
Yep.
It makes you wonder what they would have done to originally, right? Like, so you do have to be smart. You do have to like go to school. You have to like, you know, work hard in some respects. I don't know what their generational wealth was to get to where Harvey and Charlie were as dentists. But it does make you wonder what they would be willing to do had they had hardships on their way to achieving that.
You know, it's so interesting that you mentioned that because we've got such the opposite, if you will, of achievement, right? You have people in a gang, a Latin king, at least one, that has survived on the streets, that is, you know, murder and stealing and, you know, survival. That's his way of life. And then you have the polar opposite of that, yet they come together to do the exact same crime. You know, it's like the Trading Places movie, right? What happens?
I mean,
take the rich and put them in a gang situation, and then the gangbanger, if you gave him a chance in the other life. I think it's all so interesting.
Well, and also, you know, Luis Rivera and Sigfredo Garcia do not mean a goddamn thing to the Adelsons, right? They are objects too. They're objects to get what they want. And if they're vulnerable, so much the better, right? They're vulnerable. That's why they're willing to take money to do this thing that actually even the gangster had kind of a conscience about, right? I mean, if the stories are true, right? I mean, he felt more about killing someone than Donna did, but he doesn't mean anything to her. She's happy to see him struggle with his conscience, and she's happy to see him go to prison for life because no one matters to her.
You know what, Doc? I want to take a couple of questions, and I can't thank you enough. Like, I have so enjoyed this discussion. The Adelsons, that case was complicated. It lasted for years. It's so interesting to talk to somebody who has followed this case for more than a decade and to understand why you were so attached to it. Hopefully, I'm giving some of our listeners time to get some questions together. I'm going to take a look really quick and entertain questions for you.
Look at those cute glasses.
Oh, yeah. Well, I have a different pair all the time because I'm always breaking them. So thanks so much. Yeah, Dan, so we're just talking about Dan. Let's see. Arrest Wendy. I hope they arrest Wendy. Yep, Wendy put it in motion. There's a lot of Wendy fans. I can't wait till Donna goes to trial. You know what? I may even stream the Donald Adelson trial, and I'll tell you why. I want to do the lady in the box, or not the lady in the box, the guy in the suitcase. That case is really something. Right. But I think we're going to see some really interesting testimony, shenanigans. I think it could be really a fascinating trial. So I like that idea coming in from which one of our listeners here. And yes, forensic intent. She is so smart. That's about you. And Sonia says, I can't wait for this to go to trial. Yeah, you know, me too. I want to see her get her just rewards. And this is going to be one of those truly circumstantial cases. And being from a law enforcement background, I'd rather have a circumstantial case. Everybody poo-poos circumstantial cases. Again, if I look outside and my grass is green and the next morning I look outside and it's white with snow, it snowed. I don't have to watch the snow come down. It snowed. And when I have a case that is direct testimony, in other words, Joe Blow saw Jim Beam do X, that's when I end up with problems because
Yep.
mistaken identity, it
Yep.
was too dark. They have another reason for coming forward. So I love these circumstantial cases. I think it's going to come together beautifully.
Yeah, we have and you're the law enforcement person here, but I've always thought about this, that I don't think people really understand the distinctions between direct evidence and circumstantial evidence, because frankly, the things we consider direct evidence can also be circumstantial, right? If I find blood in your car, could it have been that the victim was there and had a nosebleed, right? So like just the fact that there is a physical thing there doesn't mean that there have to be circumstantial explanations for these things, right? I'm not wrong about that, right?
No, you're not. And the circumstantial cases are just great, I think, because they tell a story in and of themselves, and they're physical pieces and phone calls and evidence that strung together makes perfect sense. And I think that's what we're going to see in this situation. Let me just make sure I don't have any juicy questions. Oh,
so
good.
while you're looking for questions, can I just say one thing to everyone?
Yes, go ahead.
Which is,
SC, by the way, says you're a great guest, and I think
who said? Oh, thank you. I love being your guest. It makes me so happy. I want everyone to watch carefully for Jeffrey Lacasse's testimony. I hope that he will testify. That man is, he's the opposite of everything with the Adelsons. He is empathetic. He's also thorough and careful and a terrific scholar and researcher. He should call me. Give me a call, Jeff, because he does research that's a bit like mine, and I'd love to meet him. He can come out to Furman. But he really nailed it. Jeffrey Lacasse nailed it from day one and said, you need to look at the Adelsons from the very beginning. He gave some great testimony about Wendy's fragility and how much this was he knew something was wrong. He knew something was wrong, that the way she was behaving, he knew something was up. And then of course, Dan Markel ends up dead. Right. And so I think he is such a great witness, and he's fascinating, and he's so organized and thoughtful, and he's just great on the stand. And so I'm just really excited that there are people like Jeffrey Lacasse in the world who are willing to do this, who are willing to go back through all of his receipts and all of his records and all of his calendars to tell us exactly where Wendy was on what day and the things that she said and the kinds of ways she expressed herself, and, analyzed Charlie, and really could tell the story. I mean, he really is one of the linchpins for telling this story. So I want everyone to look out for him, because that is a man I really admire and respect.
That's great. Well, Doc, I've taken up a lot of your time. I can't
so good
enough. I'm definitely going to have you back on future shows. I just love your insight on this case. Oh my gosh, factually. So hopefully you'll come back and visit us.
Anytime. I mean, and I'll talk about this case. If you live stream this case, I hope you will invite me back, because I have so much to say about it. So
yeah, absolutely. Okay. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
And until next time, Doctor, may justice be served.
May justice be served. Bye-bye.